Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Well, for the last couple of weeks or so, actually a little longer, I've been thinking about the connection between the missing people in national and state parks and the Sasquatch Dogman sightings, encounters, and attacks. Today, I've got some things I really want to share with you that the government does not want me to. Before we get into this upload, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook version. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. They're available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those audiobooks are also in the description as well. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Really quick before we get into the first part of the upload, when I said the government does not want me to share, I mean, these are possible connections into the 411 and the cryptid encounters. They don't want the connection to be known, and that's my belief and many of yours as well. Today's first part of the upload. This is a true experience of something strange that happened to me and two of my friends one summer in the early 2000s. It happened in the town I grew up in, with one of my friends being a lifelong friend from childhood, and the other a college friend of his. We had gone off to different schools, and being home for the summer, we were just having fun partying and whatnot. This particular night, I got together with my friend James, I'll call him, and his college friend Mark. It was a hot night, and we decided to jump the fence to our town pool and go swimming. We had done this a dozen times before, and have never had any trouble, and only really ever needed to keep an eye out for the local police. We got there, hopped the fence, stargazed on top of these canopies, and went swimming. We weren't that loud, as we didn't want to attract any attention if any cops came through looking for kids doing exactly what we were doing. About an hour into being there, all of us in the pool, we heard a low grumble come from the woods that surrounded the pool grounds on three sides. It rose quickly in intensity and volume, with a rapid Doppler effect moving towards us from deep in the woods. It sounded horrible, like a pack of very angry dogs or wolves, or something, all roaring ever louder, like talking over one another. We all froze at the beginning of it, and just stared into the woods at the direction it was coming from. It came so fast, charging to the tree line and the chain-link fence that surrounds the pool grounds. I've never been so frightened in my life. The thing I remember clearly was that there were no sounds of footfalls. Whatever it was, it moved through the woods at rapid speed, with no discernible thumps of branches being crushed underfoot or branches or anything else being moved or brushed aside. The awful roaring reached a crescendo just as it broke the tree line and got to the fence. Or so our ears told us, because we couldn't see anything there. We all remained frozen in the pool, just staring, waiting for our deaths. I really don't know how long we stayed motionless in the pool, staring, but the sound stopped abruptly when it got to the edge of the grounds. It was such an awful, heart-chilling sound it made our blood ran cold on a hot summer night. After God knows how long, we all snapped out of it, and got to the pool's edge, hauled ourselves out, grabbed our clothes, and ran dripping wet and jumped the fence and took off. Now, the thing is, this is the suburbs, only about 20 minutes outside of New York City, so there are no bear, no wolves. And I've never seen a dog without a master, much less a pack of wild dogs here. This was one of the most frightening moments of my life, and I have no idea what it was. I actually completely forgot about the incident until a few years ago when my friend James brought it up, and the entire thing came flooding back at once. The only thing I can compare the sound to is in one Bigfoot documentary I saw, and the man who said he heard one mimicked the sound he heard. That's the closest I've ever heard. Being that this is the suburbs outside of a very dense, packed city, and knowing the size of the woods, I found it nearly impossible for it to be that. These woods are not large at all, maybe a few square miles, and the other side of the woods are then bordered by businesses, schools, and houses. So I don't really know what it is after all this time. I asked my friend about it again 2 Christmases ago, and he said he thought it were aliens. I haven't spoken to Mark, as he was more of my friend's friend, but I'm now curious what he thinks after all of this time. Today's second part of the upload. You can believe this or not, I was either 11 or 12 when this happened. As a 24-year-old, I still do not get it. I live somewhere between Declib, Illinois, and Rockford. It's a very rural area, a lot of cornfields, and then forested areas. A kid went missing a year or so ago, a brother of an ex-co-worker, and they found him months later dead in a field from exposure. The field was only like 2 miles away from our house. Well, I was riding bikes with my friend one day. My town is pretty small, 5,000 people, fewer than, and has 2 decent-sized forest preserves. Well, we decided to go to a part we had never been before. We walked into the forest. I was a pretty well-hiked kid, sure-footed, smart. Had been hiking on this land before. My friend was less of that, although she still remembers this as well. It was then that I felt the call everyone on here claims to talk about, the feeling that the forest is drawing you in. I started walking quickly into the forest, my friend behind me. I genuinely felt that I was being drawn in, a feeling I've never listened to again. It was like a dreamlike, creepy feeling of keep walking. The experience feels like a dream, actually, but my mom remembers me talking about it, and my friend remembers it. A stick snaps, a thick one. I look up, my friend doesn't. I see a huge beast, a dog, possibly a wolf. In black, it jumped behind a tree, then disappeared. I can't understand or explain what it was, but it looked like a pure shadow. We don't have black wolves or any wolves here, and it disappeared as soon as I saw it. I bolted wordlessly. My friend followed. She never saw, but she remembers the feeling. I was raised super religious, and for weeks I thought it was the omen of my death. I cried to my mom about it. I slept with my lights on for months. I thought it genuinely had to be some strange omen. I thought I was dying. Anyway, I can't figure it out or even think of what that was so strange. The feeling may have been worse than the visual. Today's third part of the upload. This didn't happen to me, but both of my parents. My mom was a teenager and was at the lake with her family. She was around 17, and her 2 younger brothers, their 2 cousins, and their 2 St. Bernards. They were walking along a paved path. It's a campground type area. The dogs suddenly start losing their shit, trying to run back the way they came, which was the opposite direction from the cabin, but they wouldn't leave my mom and uncle. They weren't on leashes, but one of them actually bit my mom's shorts and started pulling her backwards like a bad comedy movie. That was totally unusual behavior. Both dogs were extremely loyal and rather protective, but were generally pretty chill and friendly. They were all just standing around and laughing at the dog's weird behavior, never understanding what was going on. Then my mom says it seemed like they all looked up at the exact same second. One of the dogs started to whimper and cower like it was absolutely terrified. All four of them looked up at the trees to the right of the trail in front of them and saw a huge Sasquatch. It was extremely close, maybe 8 yards away, mind-blowingly huge. Mom guesses between 8 to 10 feet. This was close to dusk, but not dark, and all four of them are adamant to this day that it was nothing like a bear and nothing else it could be compared to. The creature was staring at them just inside the tree line, and it crouched down when they looked, not like it was trying to hide or about to pounce. My mom said it was almost like a person who was trying to greet a dog that was shy. The moment was really brief, though. Then it straightened up and crossed the path into the trees on the other side, eyeballing them the whole way. Mom says that it didn't put off any antagonistic or threatening vibes, more just weary and almost forced, casual, nothing to see here, move along. Not that that stopped Mom and company from being absolutely terrified. As soon as they unfroze and coaxed the dogs to continue on, they all booked it back to the cabin. When they told everyone about it, some of the others, a few of her uncles, her other brother, and another cousin, I think, went back to look around. The dogs absolutely refused to go near that path and would freak out whenever my mom or her siblings tried to go in that direction again for the rest of the weekend. My mom is an extremely rational person and does not believe in supernatural things generally. And she is not a person who ever exaggerates or bends the truth. So there really isn't anyone I would trust more in a first-hand account like this. Now my dad, not as honest and grounded as my mom, but with his own strong moral code about some things, and also not an exaggerator or a liar. He's an alcoholic, so he did lie about stuff all the time, but he isn't the type to make up stories just because. My dad was an avid outdoorsman, and this took place before his alcoholism surfaced. There are few people as well versed about the area, northwest Washington, as him. He knows the woods, the animals, the weather, the vegetation. He can calmly identify the screams of cougars, dying rabbit, or deer, all the native birds, and anything else that one may hear in the woods around here. He's also a very calm, unflappable person. I remember a time when I was 10-ish, when we were out hunting, and he calmly pointed out the cougar that had been stalking us for several miles. It took me forever to spot it, even with him describing its location. After that, he forced me to continue on, rationally explaining the cat's behavior in a regular, level-speaking voice, knowing we weren't going to come across any deer. Sorry for the seemingly irrelevant side story. Just trying to give some background to give you an idea of the source. Anyway, about 15 years ago, my dad was hunting one of his usual areas, alone, as was typical for him. He was about 4 miles in from the logging road where he had parked, and the sun had just barely come up. He was heading towards a creek. That was always kind of a central starting point we used when hunting that area. He was wandering around looking for signs and finding absolutely nothing recent, very unusual in this area, when he heard what he describes as the most utterly terrifying noise he has ever encountered. Not having heard it myself, I might not be describing it accurately, but from what I remember, he said it was multitonal, as if 2 to 3 voices of varying pitches were screaming in disharmonic unison. If they hadn't gone up and down in pitch and started and ended simultaneously, he would have thought they were several different voices. Every hair on his body stood on end, and he said he was overcome with a horrifying feeling of dread. The voice, he said that the individual pitches were rather human-like, screamed for longer than any human lungs could sustain. I think he estimated over a minute, but I could be wrong about that, and did not pause nor did it happen again after it ended, and what the way the sound reverberated gave him the impression that it came from very far away. But given the ear-splitting volume, that didn't make total sense either. Anyway, he decides to get the hell out of there. The conundrum he faced was that the sound came from the same direction his truck was parked. He told me that he rationalized that he would rather be found torn to bits by some mythical beast than die embarrassingly from getting lost in the woods, as may happen if he went the other direction. That part may have been a joke. But also, part of him was afraid as he was misreading something, and that it was the sound of some animal in pain, which he couldn't stand the idea of, and if he did come across it, he would either help it or put it out of its misery. The last thing he told himself before heading back to his truck is if that was a hunting cry, the animal who made it was most likely sprinting in the other direction, and unless it ran into him and his 30-06 head on, they would probably not meet. So we headed back. He sprinted noisily, figuring if there were more of whatever that was out there, they already knew he was there anyway. He said he carried his rifle rather than slinging it on his back as he normally would, round chambered and safety off. This, more than anything, is a testament to his fear. My dad was the biggest gun safety advocate I had ever met, and I'm a hunter safety instructor, so that's saying something. About a mile from his truck, he came across an area. I picture a clearing, but I don't think he actually said that. That smelled horrible. I remember him saying it was a mix of garbage and decay and several other things. I just can't remember all of the details. He was covering his nose with his shirt to get through, and he came across a pile of extremely fresh deer guts. This wasn't the source of smell that he would have known, but he said they were in a pretty neat little pile, and it was at least 2 animals' worth. It was guts and legs which looked to be almost torn off, not cut, but no heads or carcass or pelts or anything. There was a good amount of blood smeared around, but no puddle as would be typical of an animal that was bled out by another hunter. He said that he took a little while looking around. He's a passionate anti-poacher and was looking for evidence. That is what was going on. But that's about the time that his brain clicked and came to the conclusion that he may have been interrupting something's lunch. So he booked it the hell out of there again. He gets to his truck and didn't take his pack off or buckle up until he was off the mountain. I remember listening to him tell my brother and me the story when we got home from school that day and being baffled, as I'd never seen my dad afraid before. While I've never seen or experienced any of these creatures, Sasquatch or Dogman, I've heard first-hand accounts from people I consider to be extremely reliable sources. Today's fourth part of the upload. There was a guy who was working on my house on a regular basis, and I got to know him well. He was a roughneck and always had been. While working one day in the basement near the archives, he noticed all of the books on odd subjects. He wasn't too interested in UFOs, but he picked up books on Bigfoot off the shelf. He wanted to read some of it, but what he really wanted to do was tell me about his younger life in Oregon. He had grown up in the area of Sweet Home, Oregon. I don't know if his father was employed by the lumber companies, but it's likely. They used to take hiking and camping trips into the mountains. When my worker was grown and on his own, he and his brother continued this. So when they went, his brother would go one way towards the pot, and he'd go the other. As these outings proceeded, he felt that there were regular signs of presence of Sasquatch, and that he had even seen one at a distance. Then came the close encounter. He had prepared the camp in an honorary way, with the recumbent dream catcher at the campground table, plus left a portion of food behind. When he returned, the food was gone. No real mystery, but there is, in a place, was an eagle feather. Native American cultures consider the eagle feather a sign of honoring the recipient as a person due respect. My worker did not know that, but he wondered if the gift giver was thanking him for respecting the woods. Suddenly, there not far away, was the creature itself, a classic Sasquatch. He thought that he was being communicated to somehow, and the respect was mutual. Still, even with this, my worker, a tough guy male, still held on to the idea that this was some kind of human-like biological creature. So I asked him, how did this meeting end? He replied that the creature just turned away and vanished. I asked, vanished or just walked away? He said, well, he just vanished. I looked at him silently for a few seconds. Vanished? Does that sound like anything biological to you? He got silent for a moment. It was as if just then he realized that he had no simple explanation for his experience. Today's fifth encounter. I was fishing in a small creek, the east branch of the Perkleman, in southeast Pennsylvania, when I saw something strange. I was fishing a small, narrow part of it, no more than 20 feet wide. And on the opposite side from where I was, instead of a bank, there's a cliff, about 15 feet. I was fishing on the bank and heard some rustling, not all that unusual, but I felt different. I felt like I was being watched, and I looked up and saw atop of that cliff in the trees a figure. I had been where that figure was, and judging by where it was and all, this thing looked to be about 7.5 feet tall. It looked like the mountain from the Game of Thrones. I'm 6'2", and there was a branch a few inches above my head, and this branch was at the creature's chest. This fur was dark brown, and I could tell by the way it moved it definitely was something that was 7.5 feet tall. Its hips, knees, shoulders, elbows, etc., bent at the places, so it clearly wasn't a person who was shorter in a costume. I'm not sure if it was someone in a costume or not, but I doubt it was. Very few people are over 7 feet. I know it sounds crazy, and I'm sure a lot of you will call bullshit, but I swear this story's true. I left immediately, faster than I ever have. Again, I'm 6'2", 220, and by no means a small or weak person, but this thing would have dwarfed me and definitely could have taken me if it wanted to. I definitely think Sasquatch are real, and even more so after this experience. I'm not so sure of Bigfoot abducting kids because I don't think Bigfoots want anything to do with us, hence why whenever people see them, it's usually them running away from you. But if Sasquatch really did want to abduct kids, I think it could definitely explain the disappearances. Today's sixth encounter. When I was younger, around elementary/middle school years, I used to visit Tennessee with my grandmother and my cousins about every other summer. We stayed at my great-grandmother's house, a large home surrounded by mountains on all sides. There was a large backyard, around 2 football fields long, that went directly down a hill. On all sides, just thick woods and trees. My cousins and I would play at the very end of the yard, right on the tree line. We would ride those toy cars down the hill. It's amazing we didn't get hurt. Anyway, we would frequently sneak off into the woods. The adults, my grandmother or our aunts and uncles, didn't want us to, and we would get in trouble if they saw, but of course, we did it anyway. One summer, I was down near the woods with my older cousin who lived at the house, and little brother. This was probably about 12 years ago, so the details are hard to recall. I was feeling bored and the only girl hanging out with a bunch of boys and decided to go into the woods. I went in on the left side of the yard. I was playing around near this old well that was out there, doing what kids do, jumping around from fallen branches on the ground. Cousin and brother were still in the yard doing boy things. I don't remember how long I was in the woods. I would say less than 20 minutes. Some time goes by and I hear my cousin or brother, I can't recall at this point, call my name. So I start walking back toward the yard, thinking maybe the adults are looking for us or want us to come inside. It's still pretty bright outside at this point, probably about 5 or 6 in the evening. I can see perfectly. I'm walking to the yard, not really paying attention to what's ahead of me. I just remember that I was looking down at the ground. I heard a strange sound from in front of me. Hard to explain. It was loud, like a crunch of leaves or branches, only much louder, like if someone with a heavy boots would have had to have been steel toes, I assume, made one stomp. But it was only one crunching noise. I looked up, and it didn't really register at first what I was seeing, but what I saw immediately sent a feeling over me that I had until that point in my life never felt before. I saw just my legs, dark legs, like shadows, one set, but definitely legs. It wasn't exactly solid, it was kind of gassy. I guess that's the best way to describe it. There was absolutely no torso connecting to these legs. Where there should have been an upper body was nothing. At first I felt like I couldn't or shouldn't make any movements, like something was telling me to stay still. There were no noises at this point, just complete quiet, like everything had gone still. I can't say how much time had passed, probably only seconds, but it could have been minutes. I heard my name being called again from the yard, and I booked it out of there, broke through the tree line, and ran up the hill without stopping where my cousin and brother were. They followed me. My cousin caught up to me. Once we got to the top of the yard, he asked me what was happening. I was clearly terrified, about 12 or 14 at the time, I don't remember. He asked me what I saw. I don't remember what I said, but it was something along the lines of legs. I wasn't very descriptive. He took me aside later and described to me something he saw a few years ago, and I confirmed it was the exact same thing. This was the beginning of summer, and I didn't go back out again. I absolutely refused, but didn't want to talk about it. Some other odd things happened that summer, but nothing nearly as frightening. Today's final encounter. It was 2015, and I had gone camping with 3 friends. This was like the 3rd time camping ever. And we were at a pay-to-stay campground. We even stayed in a tiny cabin by the lake, so it wasn't out in the wild. Now, back then I used to get panic attacks sometimes for no reason, and for some reason, despite my immense love of nature. Ever since my first camping trip, I would often get panic attacks when camping. I don't know why. Well, that night I had one, and it was pretty severe to the point where I felt like I couldn't breathe if I stayed in the cabin. But I'd get scared if I stayed outside, so I had a lot of back and forth. My poor friends had to put up with me. At one point I stepped outside with my then significant other, and was trying to calm down, and also wondering where to pee. So my significant other had a flashlight and was leading me to a spot in the dirt at the edge of the trees between our parked cars. He reasoned it was a good distance from the cabin, and yet not in the middle of the woods, where some critter would catch me with my pants down, so I agreed. And that's when I saw it. I can still remember. I stepped past the first car and looked between the cars toward the edge of the woods, between the candles at the cabin and the flashlight nearby, but not directly upon the spot where I saw this. I saw a creature. It was so strange because it was silent. The creature had a general body shape of a dog, but its colors and features were more like a hyena, kind of gray and dark splotches. It stood perfectly still, peeking out from behind the car, so I only saw its torso and head and front legs. The thing I'll never get over was its face. It looked like it was frozen in time with its jaw wide open, revealing sharp, bright teeth. Its eyes were looking right at me. But its nose wasn't wrinkled like a snarl, and there was no growling, no sound. It was the oddest thing. And it sent an instant, deep ball of dread down into my core. After I froze for a long time, I grabbed my significant other's arm and urgently whispered for him to go back to the cabin and pulled him back. Also, I forgot to mention the eyes were glowing, maybe reflecting the light. We get to the cabin, the other friends were asleep. My significant other didn't see it at all, I don't think. I have to ask him. I couldn't sleep that night with my panic, and now that sight, I eventually went and slept in the car. Somehow that felt safer. The photo that you're seeing in this video is a photo that the person that had this experience found online, and it is the only photo that resembled what they saw that night. That's why this photo is up. It is not the exact photo they took, just what they feel this creature resembled the most of. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's upload. I hope you guys can see the connection that I am seeing between these 411s or missing people in state and national parks and cryptid encounters, whether it be Dogman or Sasquatch. There is no greater evil than just two hairy beasts running through the forest, making people disappear, possibly killing them or bringing them to another dimension. Who knows? It just needs to stop, and the government needs to make us aware so we can be aware. Those people that are out there can be aware and not just thinking this is BS or we're all wearing tinfoil hats hiding in the cellar. Anyway, thanks for always listening. I hope you guys have an enjoyable rest of your day. And with that, farewell and see ya!